right, well, what we're going to do this weekend and next weekend is continue the subject we started last weekend. So those of you who were there, remember we started with the subject, belief matter. And remember we started with that subject and we really only got to it a little bit on the Sunday, didn't we? Because we were discussing so many other things. And so the first thing I would like to do is revise some of the beliefs that we started talking about on the Sunday, which were beliefs about God. And why they matter. So if you have a look at that presentation or listen to it in the future, we discuss why beliefs matter so much. But also, once we start discussing the beliefs, you'll come to see why they matter so much as a part of the exercise anyway. And it's very important to see that actually your beliefs matter more than almost anything else. They matter more than your emotions. They matter more than your sexual feelings. They matter more than what you do physically. And they also matter more than you, actually. Because your entire life is going to be dictated to by your beliefs. And your beliefs determine not just your life now, but they determine what you aspire for in your future. So your beliefs determine your future to a large degree as well. And this is why challenging false beliefs is very, very important. And when we say challenging, and what we mean is we need to make some direct statements about what is false, what is true. That at least opens our mind and our heart to the concept that what if that is false? Or what if that is true? How should my life be lived then if I really believed that thing was true? Or I really believed that thing was false? What would my life be and how would my life change if these things were true or false? And most of us are more worried about our feelings than we are about our beliefs, right? And this is something that we've noticed. We've done a lot of talking, right, with people, obviously, for many, many years now, decades. And almost every audience always wants to get into their feelings about things. But very few audiences want to get into the beliefs about things. And we find this quite interesting because beliefs have far more power in your life than your feelings have. Now, when I say they have far more power, what I mean is your beliefs are emotions that are specific to principles, whereas your feelings are not necessarily specific to principles. So if you look at beliefs, you can see the principles of the belief, which are all based on emotions connected with a belief. And these principles, because they are emotional, they will have a very, very large impact upon how you live your life. Now, maybe we need to give an example of that in terms of a belief that's emotional that has an impact on how you live your life. So let's say you don't believe in an afterlife. All right? Let's say you don't believe in one. Now, many of you who think you believe in one don't believe in one. You know how I know that? Because you act like you don't believe in one. See, a person who believes in an afterlife prepares for the afterlife. And what I mean by prepares, they will try to learn everything they possibly can about the afterlife and about how they can improve their entry into that life and also improve their life once they're there. So if you really believed in an afterlife, you would spend a fair portion of your time preparing for that life. But the average person on earth doesn't do that. They spend most of their time having this life and very little time preparing for the next life. And in fact, usually the older we get, the more afraid of the next life we get and the less preparation we do, which is also interesting, isn't it? It's funny because you think that the closer you get to passing, the more you'd be thinking, well, what's going to happen on the other side of passing? Where am I going to be? Where am I going to be living? What am I going to be doing? You know, how does it work? How does that life work? Where will I be? How will I live? Who will I be with? All these questions naturally would come up, but the average person, the more afraid they become of their own death, the more afraid they become to address any of those questions. And that indicates how much we don't believe in an afterlife. And what we're doing mostly when we're living life on earth is we believe in this life because we can see it. We don't believe in the next life because we've not gone there yet and we don't see it. We have a lot of, you could say, ideas about the next life, couldn't you? And those ideas are very, very widely spread in terms of concepts or philosophies. And yet, most people always end up saying, well, we can't know for certain until I'm there. And to some extent, that's true. But there are many ways you can learn about that life from people who are there already. If they could pass that information to you and that information be accurate, then you would know how to prepare. Now, the average person is not interested in doing that. The average person is only interested in living their life here, which indicates that they don't really believe there is an afterlife. Inside themselves emotionally, because their senses and their feelings are all tied up in this life, there's hardly any preparation for the next life. That makes sense? Yeah. So that's an example how our beliefs, if they were really certain and were emotional, and I believed in an afterlife, I would begin preparing for it, just like I'd prepare for a trip. Like when Mary and I decided we were going to come around to these countries to teach this, the last 4 months, we had to do a lot of preparation. We had to learn things about the country. There were some things we didn't learn enough about, and we got stopped at borders because of it, because we didn't know things, and we didn't learn them. So it's important to be able to learn these things. So what's your entry visa into the spirit world? Will you go, have you got a good entry visa that lets you get to the second sphere, or are you going to be only in the first sphere? And let's say you can't even be in the top of this first sphere. Let's say your entry visa only lets you go into the hells. Well, how are you going to feel about that, right? These are things you would wonder about if you believed in the afterlife in a really certain manner, like an emotional manner, and believed it. For most of us, we think that our thoughts are our beliefs. You follow? Because we think our thoughts are our beliefs, we're not feeling how our emotional beliefs are sometimes opposing our thoughts. Right? So the average person might feel, an example of that, the average person might believe there is a God and believe they want to have a relationship with God, but that be only in their mind. In their heart, their feeling is they're angry with God. So now, what's in the mind is in complete disharmony with what's in the real belief, the emotion. And what is going to determine what you do thereafter is going to be the emotion, not what's in your mind. So if you feel angry with God, then of course any feelings of prayer towards God are not going to be like desiring God's love. They're going to be wanting to have a good barney with God instead. That would be the emotion that's inside of yourself. And if my mind is saying I want my relationship with God, but my emotion is saying I want to have an argument with God, can you see that's going to be very difficult for me to resolve unless I understand that actually what's in my head really doesn't matter at all with regard to my beliefs. What matters is what's in my emotions. So these principles, which need to be in my heart, not in my head, are going to dictate the future of my life. Right? And if these principles or these beliefs are in my heart, then I will it would determine to a large degree what I choose to do with my future life. It would determine the decisions I make, the choices I make, who I spend time with, what I do, my work, my attitudes to the environment, my attitudes to people, my attitudes to God and the future life. All going to be determined by the emotional principles that are set inside of me, which are beliefs set inside of me. And those beliefs often will be very, very contrary to what you think in your mind is your belief. Now, is there any questions about that these beliefs are emotional?
So
How
do I develop such that my beliefs are not just in my mind, but it's in my heart?
Yes, it's a very important question. Like, how do I know the difference, firstly? And then how do I get beliefs that I think I should have? How do I actually get them so that I feel that I have them? Is a very important thing to discuss, isn't it? And just briefly, it's quite simple. Your soul, so let's say this is me. Inside of me, there are already, you could say, taints to my beliefs, errors in my beliefs. So let's draw them in red. They are the errors in my beliefs. Now, unfortunately, with growing up in a world, and this world currently is in the hell condition, most of our beliefs, it's not just a tiny portion. It's actually stored inside of us. Most of my beliefs are actually errors, right? That are emotionally stored inside of me due to my experience. Now, I imbibe them through a process that included my senses. Remember last week we talked about that? Our senses, like sense of sight, touch, taste, feelings. So it's a sensory experience that were added to my emotional assessment of that experience, and that all got stored in my memories. So you could say these memories now have determined to a large degree my emotional state. And unfortunately what's going to happen is any thought that's presented to me, I will only be able to imbibe if my memories allow those thoughts to come. So let's say I was brought up to believe, I was brought up in a Christian faith. And in that Christian faith has a number of different ideas or concepts, firstly about God and about men and women. So one of the concepts it has about men and women is that women are in subjection to men. That's a part of the Christian faith. But I can't accept that unless in my own family there was the concept that my father was better than my mother. So if my father has more worth than my mother, now in the family, as I was growing up, now when I'm presented with the belief that men are the persons in authority and women need to be in subjection, I'm prepared to accept that belief because it agrees with my error. You follow? So as the belief comes to me, this error inside of me, so that you could say the belief is being presented to me, if the belief connects with me emotionally, then I'll accept it. If the belief does not connect with me emotionally, then in my soul I'll reject it, even though I'm thinking in my mind I'm accepting it. Right? So now these emotions, these memories, and the beliefs are joining themselves with each other. So we've got the emotional experience, the senses and the emotions which combine to create my memories, are now being joined with beliefs that are being presented from the outside world that I'm now evaluating as a child. Right? And interestingly enough, the ones that I will accept will be the ones that the emotions in me won't reject. So there's a clear pathway. If the pathway allows this belief, so if this belief is let's call it a false belief, so we write it in red, and it agrees with the emotions that are already inside of me, that I've chosen to keep inside of me, or I've been forced to keep inside of me. Because remember, in our childhood, we've either chosen to avoid feelings, or our family of origin has encouraged us through pressure to avoid certain feelings. And those feelings now exist inside of me. So any belief now that agrees with those feelings, you could say that it's the same colour as my feelings, that belief will also now enter me and join with the emotion that is pre-existing in me, that I've stored. Any belief, so a blue belief entering me, like a correct belief, let's call it, entering me, will be repelled by those emotions. So I might even absorb it or think I have it in my head, but in my feelings it's going to be completely different. So this is what we notice a lot about America. You say men and women are equal, right? But almost every person we meet in America doesn't have that belief in their heart. Almost every person treats men as if they are superior, which is interesting, which means that in your family of origin, men were generally treated as superior. And it also means that your religious beliefs are going to be very much aligned with beliefs that say men are superior. It also means that in the family, you hear things like, we were having a conversation with Sai and Anusha and Cheng and Kim during the week on Wednesday, and we're hearing from Sai and Cheng thoughts from them where they're thinking that they are treating their wives as if they're equal. But as we worked out, hey guys, you weren't treating them as equal, because the feelings were being reflected by the words being said, down to the point of even, do I let my wife do this, or do I let her do that? Well, there's a statement that says, you're not equal, quite simply. Does that make sense? So you can see that the upbringing, which is basically saying men are more important than women, has precluded, even though in both Sai and Cheng's mind, they think their partner is equal as they are in their mind, but the way they're saying and talking about it and the way they're feeling about it is, she's not equal to me. She's less than me. I can tell her what to do and she should listen to that. She should follow my advice. Right? I'm the person with the final say. You know, these kind of attitudes are still there inside. So the emotion is going to determine the actual principle that you live by, not what's in your mind. Right? And so every time that happened, Mary and I get, see, it's going there again, and there it is again, and there it is again. And after a while, people often get quite frustrated with us because it's hard to have a conversation with somebody saying, well, there's the problem again, and there's the problem again, and so forth. But it's important to understand, because if we can understand that the false beliefs, the memories that are based on error that exist inside of me are now going to determine how I act in my future, this is a very important principle to understand. And the principles I then live by are going to be determined by the emotions that have joined with the beliefs. Now your question was, how do I get rid of that? Well, obviously these emotions have to go, don't they? They have to actually go. Now how does an emotion go? It has to be experienced, not, you can't reframe it, and you can't do some kind of neuro-linguistic programming on it, and you can't make it different than it actually is without any other method than feeling it. You're going to have to feel it. Right? And once you get rid of the feelings associated with beliefs, it's a lot easier then to logically appraise the belief and go, is this actually true or not? But while you have the feelings associated with the belief, you're going to almost fight to the death for them. And historically, that's what's actually happened. If you look at the wars that have occurred on the planet up until modern times, the majority of them have occurred between religious concepts. People of different religious faiths warring with each other. They're willing to even to go to war to prevent themselves from having to feel something. Right? So they're willing to imbibe a belief that allows them to even go to war and fight other people to the point of killing them rather than changing their belief. Right? And that's because most of us are willing to store our belief. We desire to store our beliefs rather than feel them. We desire to avoid any painful emotion. And any false belief is going to be painful to feel.
And something we notice is, and going back to your introduction, is that people get focused on the emotion without really analysing that as a belief and analysing it against God's truth. And that's why Jesus in his introduction said people want to talk about their emotions but not their beliefs. And that's very important in this process, because Jesus' answer was, well, you have to feel what's inside of you in order to change your beliefs. But if you aren't aspiring towards truthful beliefs or towards your relationship with God, then you get caught up in the emotion without it changing. So this is a very important thing we've noticed on this truth, isn't it? That we really want to highlight with people, that you have to also develop an aspiration for true belief and true faith. Otherwise you're going to get caught in a quagmire of just feeling, but nothing is being released because there's no challenge of truth to your feeling.
No challenge.
Challenge, is that the right word?
Well,
what do we want to say about
disagreement, I suppose you could say.
No.
It's only when you disagree with the feelings inside of you, where you set up a disagreement, where your mind starts disagreeing with what's in your feelings, that you'll let the feelings go. If your mind is in agreement with your feelings, then it's highly unlikely you'll ever let those feelings go. Right? So an example of that, let's say my mind, I'm a man, and my mind feels that in my mind I'm thinking, yes, somebody in the family's got to be the person with the final say. And I'd prefer that to be me, rather than my wife. Right?
Because you know more.
Well, I might think I know more, right? I might be connected more to what I believe is logic, and she gets all emotional and I go, well, that's not very logical, and so I have a tendency then to put down the woman's emotional evaluation of an issue and for the sake of my intellect. So that means that I start thinking that I'm better than the woman in making decisions of belief and choices in our life. So in the end, like, we talk about it, but I've got the final say, is the feeling. Right? Let's say that feeling is in me. Now, when God presents to me that is wrong, and when God's saying to me, I can't have a relationship with God while I believe that, and if I feel a relationship with God is important, then can you see my mind is now starting to say, I've got to do something about this belief that I have. But conversely, if I don't really want my relationship with God and I don't really care about it, I care more about the fact that I want to have control or self-determination of our life, then my belief now is my desire and even my intellect, my logic, is going to be in complete agreement with the feeling that I have that I am superior and I should make the decisions. Right? And this is the problem we face, is that unless there's something that says this is wrong, this is bad for you and for your partner, this is bad, I'm going to think what I'm doing is good. I'm going to think it's righteous. I'm going to, and also any belief that comes along that says it's righteous. So the Bible, I read in the Bible in Corinthians, you know, many of you know your Bibles, yes? Who knows your Bibles? Not many. What's happened? In Corinthians it says that the woman should be in subjection to the man. Right? So I read that and I go, yeah, that's a great verse, that. That agrees with my belief. Right? So this also then makes me more likely to accept the other parts of that belief, because I'm accepting that part of the belief.
Yeah, and if we relate that to emotion, if we have an argument, then you can go off and feel like, oh, my wife, she just doesn't respect me. I really need to grieve that my mother didn't respect me, and you know, and then you're just reinforcing your belief in your emotions, in your emotional work.
And you're not confronting the falsity of the belief that exists inside of yourself. So you will think that you're processing something emotionally to release the thing, but actually you're not releasing the belief. The belief is actually still established, and therefore the truth is the problem with releasing the emotion. I'm not accepting the truth, and so now anything I do to release emotion, it actually isn't going to benefit me at all, because substantially my emotional connection to my belief says reject going any further than that. So in that case, when Mary acts disrespectfully to me, I go, oh, that's really bad. I need to go and process that if I've been taught to process that. Most men are not, obviously they just get angry. But let's say I'm taught, I'll go and process that, so I'll go and bash the thing up and kick kick my punching bag for yell and scream about it, and I've calmed myself down from my rage, let's say. But what's changed? Not a single thing. The belief's still inside of me. And so the very next time Mary feels like she wants to disagree with me, what's going to happen? I'll be doing exactly the same thing again. Going outside, kicking the bag and whatever, not taking it out on her, but you can see really the feeling is, no, she's at fault. So I am really taking it out on her. I'm really saying she's to blame for her disagreement with me and my opinion. I'm really saying she's the problem, not me. But rather than seeing that actually my own feelings are of the problem, that I even believe that I would be superior when God created us as equals. We're half of each other's soul eventually. Even if the person you're with is not your soulmate, you are half of a soul and they are half of a soul, and in God's eyes each half of the soul has equality. So if I'm acting in a way that I think I'm superior, I'm already in complete disagreement with how I'm made. Disagreement with God about how I've been made. And that, of course, is going to come out in many, many different areas of my life. Right? So this belief is going to be attached with these emotions, and unless I feel and experience the emotions that are stored inside of me about it, so as a man, I would have to experience, in the example I've given, I'd have to experience how I think I'm superior, and that it's wrong, and that it's a sin. And I'd have to experience that as a feeling rather than a thought. I'd have to go through that as a feeling. And if I go through that as a feeling and release that, now when we're having our conversations and Mary disagrees, I can sit down with her and say, right, I want to hear what you, and she will want to hear what, and then together, if we can't come to an agreement, then the underlying feeling will be, well, unless we make two different choices and Mary does one and I do the other, unless we do that, we're going to have to not act at all until we've resolved our disagreement. Right? It'll be one or the other that I'd have to do.
When you come to understand this, you come to really value truth, because you understand that unless I'm seeking truth and unless I have truth, unless I have truth, then I'm not really going to be able to release anything of any kind of sin from my life, because I could just be feeling sin. If Jesus went away and felt like, I'm so disrespected, and he's heard divine truth and he thinks this is about my mum, and mum never loved me, and he's in this whole illusion of his own creation through the belief. And this is why Jesus is leading with the fact that the belief matters so much, and unless you're seeking the truth about your beliefs, you'll get lost in your so-called emotional work.
Yeah. Make sense?
Yeah.
You want to ask again?
So,
Just near to you.
so to be able to identify whether my belief is
Right or wrong?
is right or wrong in line with God's love, or
Yeah.
it's basically using your conscience.
No. Well, it's conscience, yes.
Conscience to be
yes.
able to know whether
Well, you
my
remember,
my definition of love is in line with love.
that's right.
or-
Remember, your conscience isn't yours.
Yeah.
The conscience is a mechanism that exists in your soul, but actually it's God talking to you via a connection as to what is true, what is false. That's what conscience is. The problem for most of us, though, is when we have a whole heap of false beliefs inside of us already, our conscience is detuned from listening to any truth on those beliefs. So that adds an additional problem, doesn't it, in terms of, yes, you could use your conscience and find out what the truth is, but that presupposes that your conscience is open to receive that knowledge. And for most of us, the beliefs that are false are already shutting down the operation of the conscience. There are other things, though, that God does use to help us. So if we look at all the things God uses, there's firstly the conscience, which is the direct mechanism. When that's not working, and for the majority of people on earth it's not working, then the next thing is God's laws. So what laws? So we look at the laws, there's a law of attraction, bringing us a constant thing in our lives till we become aware that maybe my beliefs about this are false. Right? So the law of attraction is to help you adjust your beliefs. So if you can correctly see your attractions, then of course you would become more aware of where you might be false, right? Of course, when people see their attractions, they usually blame other people for them, rather than looking at themselves and going, actually, I need to look at this. So an example of that is, let's say someone attacks me. There's two beliefs I might have. I might have a belief that I'm superior, and so those people who feel inferior around me feel like having a go at me because I'm too arrogant, right? So that could be the reason for the attack. But the other reason for the attack could be that I feel inferior, and so I accept attack all the time. Now, you can see the one event, which is an attraction, might be caused by different causes. And if I'm not honest enough or self-aware enough, I'm going to think it's one cause rather than the other. And the cause that agrees with my sin is the one I would like to accept. Right? So there's that. So you've got the law of attraction to help you, but unfortunately most people interpret that incorrectly. Right? So what else can help you? You've got the law of cause and effect. You choose to do something in your life and it has an effect in your life. And if you look at all the effects, then maybe you can see that you're doing something wrong. So an example of that is, the effect in my life is that I always seem to have painful relationships. Let's say that's the effect. So rather than going and blaming everybody else that I had a relationship with and saying that was because that person was wrong, and when I caught up with that person that was wrong, and you get to the stage that all men or all women are wrong, you know, like whatever is the opposite gender to yourself generally, and all of those thoughts are assessments of effect where we blame others. But if I'm constantly getting the same effect in my life, then surely the law of cause and effect is saying you're bringing this on yourself one way or the other, and you've got to start looking at that, right? Looking at why. Now, in some cases, when I say you're bringing it on yourself, well, it might be because you're in a state of truth and everybody likes attacking it. But in other cases, it might be other reasons. For the most part, look at your own pain. Because if you have pain yourself, then it means that there's something to release. So if someone attacks me and I feel pain, then there's still something I need to release. But if someone attacks me and I don't feel very pained about it at all, then you know there's nothing much to release. Right? It's the pain that we're in that can also tell us. So that's the effect. The pain is the effect. And the cause must be something where I'm out of harmony with love. So there's the law of cause and effect, the law of attraction. There's also spirits. You've got your guardian and your guide. They can put little thoughts in your head. In fact, they do all the time. Many of you don't realise that a lot of the thoughts that pop into your head that you think are yours are not even yours. They're somebody trying to help you out. And if they're trying to help you out in alignment with God's truth, then it means they're a good spirit. And if they're trying to help you out in alignment with your error, then it means they're not a good spirit. Right? But every one of us has the ability to choose between the good, the good and the bad. You know, it's like those old cartoons, isn't it? You ever see those where they got devil on one side and sort of angel on the other telling you what to do? Well, if you think about it with spirits, it's almost exactly the same as that. This is where these analogies came from, these metaphors came from, is that we do get inclinations towards good at times in our life or towards bad. For the most part, when we're in a state where we're in error, we'll be inclined to listen to the error. So that's something, again, that we need to address. Mary also brought up the issue of truth. Do I want the truth no matter what?
I actually think that's the biggest thing.
One of the biggest things.
That you have control over is to develop a seeking heart
for truth. That
truth,
opens the conscience.
Almost, if you think about at any cost, if you like, at any emotion, that no emotion will be more important than the truth to you.
So the principle being, my emotions don't matter, the truth does.
And when you reach that state, then you're automatically more open to the conscience, because you're not trying to protect any emotion inside of yourself in that asking.
Yep.
But also you're far more open to what the law is showing you. And it's very, very difficult, as Jesus was saying, to actually discern the truth until you really want it. So all these things can be happening to help you see your guide, the laws. The conscience even can niggle you.
Yep.
But unless you're really seeking in your heart for truth, you'll have the tendency to ignore it, to skip over it, to brush over it, to rationalise what you're doing, to justify your feelings, those things, rather than actually releasing the feelings that are errors and experiencing more of the truth-based emotions. Because there are emotions associated with truth when you have it, when you seek it, that often we skip over as well because it brings up these other feelings.
So there's plenty of mechanisms to become aware of what the problem is. The issue is, do I want to become aware? Because fundamentally, it really boils down to one issue, and that is, am I using my will to become aware of truth? Or am I using my will in accordance with all the error that already exists in me, and the only things that I'm going to accept now is anything that's in agreement with the error that exists in me? So fundamentally, it gets down to how you've chosen to use your will, whether you're choosing to use it in a loving manner or an unloving manner. Yeah.
And you will go through a process, in this process, where you don't like personal truth, to the point where you're really hungry for it and you're looking for it everywhere, and you see it as a gift when someone points things out to you.
So you'll start in this place where most of the things inside of you are false, that any discussion about truth annoys you, one way or the other. Any discussion almost. But as you release more and more things that are false inside of you, you get to a sort of tipping point, as Mary said, where you tip from still resisting truth to wanting truth above all else. And you get to that tipping point. And you notice the people who get there, because the people who get there no longer get angry about truth they receive. They hunger for it. They desire it every single day. They're looking for it all the time. And they don't demand it, but they're looking for it all the time on a personal level. So in other words, they're self-analytical. They look at themselves. They examine themselves. They feel their feelings rather than projecting their feelings or harming other people with their feelings. This is all when you harm another person with your feelings all the time, projecting out with your feelings, This is an indication that the truth isn't important to you yet. Because if the truth was, you would never do that anymore. You'd realise the harm it brings to others. So there's a multitude of answers, you could say, to what you would do to get rid of the false. But the important thing is you're going to have to get rid of the false in order to accept the truth, what is true. The false has to leave you, otherwise it will preclude the truth from entering you. And because the false exists in you as memories that are involved with your senses and your emotions, you're going to have to feel sensory things and your emotions in order to release the false. It's not something where you can just go, oh, I like that truth, that is a truth, I think that is a truth, oh, I like that, now I've got it. Not like that at all. Never going to be like that, right? Ever. Right? What's going to happen is you're going to have to release the error, which is the sin that exists. Then you'll be open to hearing, letting the truth enter your emotional state. Right? So you're going to have to go through some painful emotions. Now, if you look at the dedication on earth, and particularly in your country and Western countries in particular, to avoiding painful emotion, it's intense. You know, like almost, you see it almost everywhere. You'd rather take 10 pills than have an emotion, right? You see this all the time. Like, for an example of that is the emotions to do with cancer are pretty easy to feel, actually. But the average person would rather take a number of different drugs to suppress all their pain and suffering that comes about from their cancer. They'd like to take it. They're happy to go and get chemotherapy, even have all their hair fall out. And they're happier to do that than they are to feel their emotion. Right? When you go to a doctor, you don't go there and say, Doc, can you help me feel my emotion as the reason why I've got a sore shoulder? It's like, Doc, can you give me something for the sore shoulder? That's the average attitude that people have, particularly in the West. It's like we have these constant feelings that we should have an easy way out of our hard emotions. The red emotions inside of me are hard. They're going to be painful because they're false, and I need to let them go. But the average person goes, I'd rather do anything else than let them go. I'd rather die than let them go. I'd rather kill somebody else than let them go. Right? You see this all the time as well, where we'd rather destroy the lives of others rather than let go of our own emotion. And if we come to here, and up the back on that side, so.
I want to ask about the motivation for doing this whole process.
Yep.
Because like you mentioned before about it's not a self-help program, it's a relationship with God program.
Yep.
So like can you talk about like the selfish motivation to do all of this versus like how does it become not selfish? Like I want to have a relationship with God, and it feels pretty selfish sometimes.
Yeah, good question. Can I ask you though, what do you think being happy is a selfish motivation?
No, but at times I feel like I just want to be happy at the cost of other people.
Yeah, so can you see, if it's at the cost of others, then it is a selfish motivation,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah. But if I want to be happy, can you see if you're truly happy, you will also be happy with the way you interact with everyone else, which would mean that they will be happy spending time with you. Yeah. If you're happy. So happiness is not a selfish motivation per se, is it? It's when you want to be happy, or happy is...
I think happy is a very...
there's a difference between pleasure and happy as well, isn't it? And when you're seeking pleasure at any cost, including your own cost or the cost of others, now that's not going to create a lot of happiness. Can you see? Because it's going to be at the cost of your own life in some point, and the lives of others. So, but happiness is a valid goal. It's a loving goal for you to be happy. Right? So why not do it just so that you can be happy? That's number one. Now, the question then becomes, what's the fastest way to happy? Well, the fastest way to happy is to live in harmony with law. That's the fastest way to be happy. Because every time you break a law, there's a painful penalty, but every time you live in harmony with the law, there's a pleasurable result. So the fastest way to happy is to live in harmony with law. Now, I'm not talking about human laws, I'm talking about God's laws. If I live in harmony with God's laws, I will be happy. And so will everyone else. Right? So God's laws become a very important part. What are God's laws? God's laws are God's statement of truth. That's what they are. So remember, Mary said earlier that the truth is the key thing. The truth will bring you happiness. Right? So when we're in a state of sin, we don't believe that, but that's a false belief. Most people in a state of sin are also in a state of pain and suffering, and they're not happy. If you look at your society, is it very happy? You know, we've gone walking a lot while we're here, you know. Walk down the street, say hello to people, hardly anybody even has a smile on their face. Hardly anybody. And you guys know we have a smile on our face quite often, right? But as we walk around, we smile, and some people even look at you, what do you smile at? Right?
Offended.
They're almost offended, right, with your smile. You can feel in them, how can we wipe that smile off their face? Type of feeling. And the reason why is that a lot of people associate addictive pleasure with happiness, but it always results in misery. Right? So true happiness is living in harmony with God's laws, or you could say living in harmony with what God's statement of truth is. And the laws are God's statement of truth. Right?
And so when you want to know what God's statement is on any issue, that's what you were talking about, those 4 different ways, but...
And the conscience is the very first way.
Yeah. But if you don't want it, I guess that's what it comes down to.
Well, that's right. It gets down to your use of your will. The use of your will. If your will is such that you don't want to live in harmony with the law, then your will is also such that you're going to be unhappy. And you're okay causing your own unhappiness.
That's pretty sad.
Yeah. But see, most of us don't believe that. That's why our beliefs matter. What we believe is that I live in harmony with my addiction. That's what's going to bring me happiness. Now, of course, our lives are showing us completely different to that. Remember that I said the cause and effect law? The effect is I'm unhappy and I think I've got to do more addictions. But I've already tried that. I've already tried addictions and that's brought me unhappiness. But I'm thinking if I try more addictions, it'll somehow correct the unhappiness. Right? Now, of course, it doesn't make a lot of logical sense, but even our mind now is distorted by the belief that my addictions give me happiness. What brings you happiness is living in harmony with truth. That's why I said in the first century, the truth will set you free. Right? Sets you free from sin. It brings you love. The truth brings you love. Even the connection you have with God, if it's not in harmony with truth, love can't be received. So the truth is a very important part of that. So you could say God's laws, which is really God's truth, is the thing that we need to focus our attention on, not your own truth. So when people get embroiled in their own emotional feelings, they're just focused on their own truth. That's not God's truth. And it might be in harmony with God's truth, but unlikely. When you're beginning the process of listening to God's truth, it's unlikely that much of your truth is truth. Most of it is error. So let's call it what it is. It's all just lies that are stored within us that we want to believe are true because we don't want to experience the pain of getting rid of it. But happiness is a good goal, and that should be one reason why we want to progress and why we want to grow in love. But also, when you think of happy, what brings you happiness?
Well, you said many times it's your relationships.
Yeah, so, but not the unloving ones.
Right.
So you could say, if I've got relationships that are loving, then that brings me happiness, doesn't it? Now that, for a relationship to be loving, it requires me to be loving and you to be loving. If you and I are going to have a loving relationship, my concept that, let's say I'm with Mary and I'm thinking all of the reasons why we got problems are Mary's fault, then obviously I'm not being honest that a relationship is two people being loving. And if we've got problems, then I need to, the person I can change is me. So I need to make sure I'm loving first. Without worrying about whether Mary's loving or unloving, I need to be concentrating on the fact whether I'm loving. Right? So relationships that are loving bring me happiness. So even if I become loving, even my relationship with Mary, who might still have chosen to be unloving, will be happier because I'm loving. Right? So these are fundamental principles where our beliefs matter. But the average person goes, relationships are important, but it's not really possible to have a loving relationship, not really possible to have a happy one. So what you do is you compromise. Now, does compromise make you happy?
No. Well, you think it does it for a little bit.
Well, it never makes you happy because you've had to compromise something you like in order to compromise. So in other words, you had to give up something you wanted for the sake of what other person wanted. So it's never going to bring happiness, even if the compromise is addiction. It's still not going to bring happiness, whether it's addiction or truth. If I compromise, then I'm going to be forsaking something that I like, something that I think makes me happy, for the sake of the other person. So compromise doesn't work either. But that's what the average person is told makes a happy relationship, is you learn how to compromise. What do they say? Two good forgivers make a good relationship. You ever heard that? No? What makes a good relationship?
Each person going 100%. Oops.
Like,
Each person going 100%.
in what?
Like
Against
in a
each other?
compromise. I mean, going more than 50%, going more than halfway.
Yeah. Well, obviously, if I'm only 50% involved in a relationship, I'm not going to be very happy in that relationship. I have to be 100% involved, don't I, in the relationship? I have a statement that I've said to others. It's like, when it comes to truth, you've got to be the bacon rather than the eggs. You know what I mean by that? You know how you got bacon and eggs, people eat it. Not that I'd recommend eating it, but people do. And the pig it was really committed because he had to die for it. The chicken didn't have to die for anything; it just laid an egg.
Not he.
So she laid an egg. So she laid an egg, and he had to die, let's say, for it. Now, who has the more commitment? Somebody who's prepared to die for a principle, or somebody who just sort of participates whenever they feel like it? Who's more committed? Can you see the person who's willing to die for the principle is far more committed? So, dying for a principle means not compromising on a principle, doesn't it? So we're not going to be happy by compromising principles. But happiness should be one goal that we have, but not just our own.
Right, so what are the other...
Happiness for everyone. Yeah?
Right.
Truth should also be a goal. You can't be happy without it. Obviously, love would be a goal. To experience love is what makes you happy, isn't it? Every time you've experienced true love, haven't you felt happier than every time you didn't experience it? And in fact, this is why relationships bring you happiness, because it's an exchange frequently of love, right? And if I love Mary and Mary loves myself, or even just if I love Mary, I'll be happy in my love. Even if Mary doesn't love me at all, I'll be happy to love her, right? Because love brings happiness. So there's many reasons, I would say, Max, for doing it. The problem is whether you believe the reasons.
And I would say
And this is
that
why we need to focus on the beliefs.
I would say something that you alluded to earlier, Max, which is, if you value happiness just as your value, then you're not going to really have much regard for what it does to other people, are you, in your pursuit of happiness?
Or the environment, or anything. Yeah.
But in my experience, if you value the qualities of love, truth, faith, and humility, happiness is a byproduct of those values. But the problem that I see on earth is that people value happiness and they don't value anything else. Whereas if you value those other qualities, happiness is a natural result. That's the way God designed the universe.
And I don't even know if people do value happiness. Like, what I see is most people value peace rather than happiness. And to them, peace is having no disagreement, is really what they think is happiness.
Comfort.
They value comfort rather than
Not
happiness. Comfort meaning that you have this level of, like, to my mind, there's bliss, happiness, right? Bliss, happy, and then underneath happy, there's sort of comfort. Now, comfort is not always happy; it's just what you're used to, isn't it? It's like we see this a lot in people's relationships where they just feel comfortable with each other, but they're definitely not happy. They've just gotten used to each other, gotten used to each other's foibles, they're gotten used to each other's traits, and gotten used to each other's actions, and gotten used to each other's behaviour, and gotten comfortable with the behaviour because they're just used to it now, but they're not happy about it, and they're certainly not in bliss with each other. They're just comfortable. So if comfortable is your focus, then you'll want to keep your addictions to a large degree, because the pain that you need to have to release addictions means you're going to have to go through pain to release addictions. And if your desire is just to have comfort, you're never going to do that. You've got to get to the stage where you want to release your addictions so that you can have bliss rather than comfort. Right?
Yeah, and fulfillment.
Yeah.
I think that there's not much emphasis on fulfillment on earth. But by that I mean, a full expression of your personality in a way that you feel fulfilled and you feel there's meaning to your existence, and that there's something...
A life of purpose, should we call it. But can you see that if I don't believe in purpose, I don't believe in bliss, and I don't believe that happiness is really possible, then what am I going to do? I'm going to be okay with comfort. Can you see my beliefs matter? If I don't believe in bliss, I'll never aim for bliss. If I don't believe that happiness is possible, I'll never aim for happiness. If I don't believe I can ever find a purpose in my life, then I'm never going to try to find a purpose in my life. Can you see how much your beliefs are affecting the choices we make? So even in the discussion about how do I deal with my emotions, unless I understand how powerful my beliefs are, I'm probably not going to deal with my emotions. Make sense, Sarah?
Yeah, so when we have these false beliefs and we need to feel the emotional pain to change them,
Yep.
is it possible in that place to, especially if false beliefs are about God, is it possible in that place to receive God's love, and then I would assume in my mind you'd have a lot of stuff just kind of tumble out and a lot of pain come out? Is that even possible, or do you have to feel emotional pain without that, before that?
Well, you have to be prepared to feel it without that.
Yes.
And so when you're prepared to feel it without that, then God has some avenue to assist you, because you're using your will that you want to do it whether you get his help or not. You see, God's perfectly happy to help you under, you could say, two circumstances. The first is that you need to be prepared to do it yourself. because it is your pain. So you need to be prepared to do it yourself. Then the second circumstance is, because you're prepared to do it yourself, you're prepared to go through all of the emotions yourself if need be, but you know God exists so you could get God's help, but you need to have a strong enough desire to ask for that help and get it. And that desire to be sincere. Right? So for God to be involved in assisting you, it's going to firstly need your own feeling that you are going to go through it whether God helps you or not. And then secondly, that you would desire in sincerity to have this relationship with God and for God to show you and help you with it if you desire that. Right? But unless you're prepared to go all of it yourself, you're not sincere yet. Unless you're prepared to go through all of it without God's help, is really what I'm saying, then how can God help you? Because you're not yet sincere with God's help. That it's a gift that He's giving you. It's not a demand. It's not something you can expect. So once I've got the right attitude inside of me that I want to do it for myself and I'm willing to go through my own pain and suffering myself, now I'm sincere enough that when I ask for God's help, I can receive that help. Is that?
Yes, thank you so much.
Yep. So the biggest issue we face is that most of us are not prepared to go through it by ourselves. And that's the problem.
And that's really what Jesus was describing there, is the state of self-responsibility. That I think we just find that in the sin.
A number of times.
Yeah, in the assistance groups in 2016 and 19, we talked a lot about what is self-responsibility.
Yeah.
And really, for us to engage a relationship with God, to connect with God in that love-based sense, we must develop self-responsibility.
Most of us believe that God, so this is one of our beliefs about God, about God's personality, is that if God loved me, He would rescue me from my problems. And the main reason why we have that false belief is because our parents often rescued us from our problems when we were younger, or they didn't and we wanted them to.
We're mad that they didn't.
And we're mad they didn't. And so we want the same from God. And unfortunately, our false beliefs about God, you could sort of break your false beliefs about God into two primary areas. You could see one area is about what God is. And the other area is about what God's nature is, or personality is.
And could you even call that what God does as well?
You could say what God does. Yeah? Right? So many of us have problems with what we believe God is, and they have what we believe God is has a huge effect on our ability to even have a relationship with God at all. But then we also have this problem with what God does, and often that can be broken into two things too: what we think He should do versus what He actually does. And often we have a list of all the things that we think God should do. If God existed at all, this is the list.
This is a great exercise to do with yourself, actually. What should God do?
For me.
For me.
Yeah. And that, which you could say are all your expectations of God, couldn't you? That's what you could call them. And then there's what God actually does, which is God's expectations of God. So there's your expectations of God, and then there's God, and what God actually defines God's going to do.
What God wants to give.
What God wants to do. And quite often, so you could say you could also call it what God wants. Right? Now, often what we want and what God wants are almost two completely different things. So we need to understand that beliefs matter in terms of what God is, in terms of how we would define God to be. And then we also need to come to understand what God wants, but what God desires to do. What is God's desire for us versus what we feel God should desire for us, right? Which are often very, very different things. Now, if I have a list of things that I think God should do for me, and God doesn't do most of them, can you see, I'm going to be quite angry with God. Right? But if I have gotten rid of all the things I think God should do, and just watch and learn about what God actually does, can you see, I'm going to be treating everything that God actually does as a gift to me, rather than something that I can expect. The majority of us have huge expectations on God based on what God wants versus what we want. And we also have huge expectations on God about what we think God is, in terms of how that affects our decision making and our choices. Right? And this is the issue we face with our beliefs about God. So shall we just focus what God is? Remember last week I started with some basic fundamental beliefs about different religious faiths, and remember I said the ones that are in error. So we started with the Christian faith. So the Christian belief is that God is Father, Son, Holy Spirit. In other words, God is triune, Trinity of beings. That's Christian belief. Can you see also what that does to many Christians? They want to focus on those two things, don't they? So when you hear Christians speaking, they often talk about Jesus all the time, or they talk about the Holy Spirit all the time. How often do you actually hear them talking about the nature or character of God, the third part of the Trinity? Can you see it? It's almost not even spoken of, right? Because they're all treated as one being. That part, the Father, is hardly mentioned, right? So that is a false belief, a Christian false belief. It has a lot of bearings on what the person then chooses to do. The person they can see or feel as human, they start to connect to, they believe. And yet the things that are not human, they believe are lesser in their connection. So immediately there's changes being made in the way they treat God as to the way they're now going to act. Then of course there's the belief associated with the Son, that the Son's blood saves the soul, which is a belief not about God but about the human soul. And that's a false belief too, but we'll discuss that when we talk about the human soul. We're thinking today we focus on God, tomorrow we focus on the human soul. False beliefs about the human soul. So that's the Christian belief. Then you've got, let's say, the Hindu belief, which is basically in many gods. And usually what that is a god for a purpose. So, if I want to have a good sexual relationship, then I go to one god for that. And if I want to have a good emotional feelings, I won't go to another god for that. And if I want to have a concept of reality, then I go to a different god for that. And this concept of many gods is in many faiths. The Romans and the Greeks of old had these kind of concepts as well, that there are many gods. Completely false. There's only one God, one creator of all, but having this view of many gods means your attention now is going to be focused on the God that you think is going to help you the most. It's interesting with Christianity, with the Catholic faith, that they've almost made the same thing out of saints. There's a saint for this purpose, and a saint for that purpose, and a saint for this purpose, and so forth. And these saints are almost like participating with God to help you out, is the idea, right? So then you've got the Buddhist belief. Which substantially is, I am God, or a part of God. Which you can also see, New Age belief is there as well, isn't it? I am God, or a part of God. So now I've got all these different concepts of God. Now, most people don't understand how big these things are and how much is going to determine your future if you believe them. Right? Many of you, even here, listening to Divine Truth, believe in one of those concepts. And the proof that you believe it is how you act. So an example of that is, I am God. This is a very, very popular concept. It's fundamentally saying that I am not needing to follow God's laws. I can create my own laws and follow them instead. I am my own lawmaker. Many of you currently believe this. You believe that what you think is true is true. So that means you believing you're your own lawmaker. Does that make sense? And so many times the decisions you make and the choices you make are not considering God's laws at all. They're considering what you believe are God's laws, or what you believe are true, not what is actually true. Right? And this fundamentally comes from this underlying belief that you're God. It actually the first human couple had that belief. A man and a man. They eventually determined, the people you know as Adam and Eve, eventually determined that they wanted to be gods themselves. They wanted to create their own laws. Right? And you can see why in almost every country of the world, almost everybody you meet lives by their own laws. So, you have laws of your country, right? USA laws. We have Australian laws where we come from. Sometimes the two are in agreement, sometimes they're in disagreement. But fundamentally, most people, whether they live in the country that's got a lot of laws or not, they still live by their own laws for the most part. They basically still do what they want when they want it, and they try to hide the fact from the country they're living in. In other words, they just do it in private. They do it without anybody knowing, and things like that, right? That's an indication that you believe you're God. Right? You believe it's righteous for you to set your own standards and live by them. Right?
And a lot of people also say, oh, that's your truth and I've got my truth, which is also an indication
that you're God.
Yeah.
You think you're God.
There's no belief in a single truth,
Yeah.
a single God.
So when you're saying to somebody, oh, that's your truth. So let's say you have an argument with your wife, right? So you're going, oh yeah, no, I'm listening to you, but that's just your truth. And my truth is blah, blah, blah. I am actually fundamentally saying, you're God for your life, and I'm God for mine. That's really what I'm saying. There's no such thing as my truth. No truth at all belongs to me. Not ever. God established all the truths. They belong to God. They are His truths. And aside from that, there's just any time you're in disagreement with God's truth. That's it. You're either in agreement with the truth or in disagreement with it. Right? And it's the truth, God's truth, not yours. So the whole concept is New Age concept, your truth, my truth. This is what you believe, this is what I believe. I don't care what you believe. I don't even care what I believe. If I don't care what I believe, why would I care what you believe? All I care about is whether what I believe is God's truth. I care what God says is true, what God believes. That's what I care about. And all I know I've got to do is just find out what God believes, what God knows is true, and just work through whatever I need to work through to accept it. And I'll be happy then if I do that. Right? But when you say, oh, this is your truth, my truth, this is very particular when we have arguments with people, isn't it? You know, you have an argument, you can't resolve it. So what do you eventually do? Oh, well, you want to hold on to that belief, that's fine. I'll keep my belief, that's fine. But it's not really fine. If you're keeping your belief and it's out of harmony with God's, it's going to hurt you. And if I keep my belief and it's out of harmony with God's, it's going to hurt me too. So it's not fine that we're in disagreement. What we need to do is go, let's actually, we both can't agree on the issue. Let's give up trying to give up all the reasons as to why we believe that particular thing is true. And let's start looking at what does God say is true on this matter. That's what I need to do. Now, imagine that everybody in the world did that. It would be wonderful, wouldn't it? That we all just gave up our own beliefs and just focused our attention on what is God's belief. Okay, just very plain.
So in full resonance with what you're saying, and also outside of just pausing, recognizing that you are speaking God's truth in that moment, like in a disagreement with your partner.
Yep.
And outside of going, okay, God, we're calling in your truth, is there any other advice that you have to know, to have that discernment between what is so-called your own individual truth and God's truth?
Well, let's not call your own individual truth.
She did.
I quoted it.
Yeah, let's just call. So this is me.
For ease of convenience of language.
Well, the trouble with our language sometimes is that we start believing it's actual a factual thing, don't we? After a while, if we're not careful. There's no such thing as my personal truth. None of it ever belongs to me. So
we can say my personal addiction or my personal, hill I want to die on.
My personal error.
We have two people, partners, they're in disagreement. Perception.
So I've got error and she's got
God's
error.
truth.
We're in disagreement.
Yeah. And so we both we both pause and we both say, God, we're calling in your truth. How do you know when that's coming through?
How can you call in God's truth when inside of you is an emotion that says, I don't want to accept it?
We'd be better off saying, okay, we both don't want God's truth on this matter.
We're better off saying the truth, which is we don't want God's truth. That's why we're holding on to our own.
That's more honest.
That's more honest. And remember, sincerity, which is the prayer to God. Sincerity is the prayer to God. So that if I'm saying I want to call in God's truth, when inside of me I'm saying, no, I'm right, you're wrong. So emotionally I'm going, I'm right, Mary's wrong. And let's call in God's truth. I already am thinking I'm right.
Like when we have an argument, just to give you an example, it's not like, often we'll be midway through and I'll go, you know what, I just really want to hold on to this belief. I need to go and deal with that. Or,
Don't have a cry.
I really, you know what, this is just triggering all my dad's stuff. I just feel, I can, even now that I'm being more emotionally honest, I can feel it's not even about this situation. I'll be back. I need to feel about this because I can feel this is clouding my perception of what's going on here. It's pointless for me at that point to go, God, give me the truth, because really I'm ensconced. I'm preoccupied with what is
Your own emotional false belief.
what I want to hold on to, what is driving me in that moment. So this is why I said it's better to just be completely honest about where you're at. And the more you practice that in your relationship, the more you both deal with things.
So perhaps, if I'm hearing correctly, it's if you're feeling triggered, then the best thing is to look
You're
at your
already in
partner
error if you're feeling triggered.
and to both take the space to go explore with God what it's bringing up before attempting to even try to come back to your partner.
Well, you need to first be humble before you even do that.
Yeah.
Humble is feel all of your own feelings. You're not even going to be able to talk to God about what God's feelings are about the matter while you're not humble about your own. So you're going to have to feel your own and be honest about your own. So if your own feeling is I'm right and he's wrong, and his feeling is I'm right and she's wrong, then you can see both of you are probably wrong right from the beginning. And if you can recognize that and go, okay, we're in disagreement, and if we were in agreement with God's truth, we would be in agreement. with each other. So one or both of us is wrong. Now, there's a strong tendency in almost every person to go, it's not me. It's you. You know what I mean? And this is something we've got to change. We've got to go, no, if the person I have control over is me. You don't have control over your wife or your husband. You have control over yourself. It's your emotions that are going to preclude God's truth from entering you. And all you need to do then is work through firstly, feel what are your emotions. And as Mary said, that begins with being honest with yourself, that you're not really interested in God's truth in that moment. You're only interested in your own error, your own preventing your own emotions is what you're actually interested in. So you're not even interested in your own, what you put in inverted commas, truth or error. You're actually interested in saving your own emotion. Your own painful emotional experience is what you want to save. And that's about humility. That's not about anything else other than humility. Wanting to save yourself from your own feelings. And this is the trouble, even when we start talking about what God is, besides what God does, if you look at what God is and you start listing things off, you start realizing, I've got issues here of my own humility, what I'm prepared to accept. And the I am God injury was the very first injury the human race imbibed. The very first. It's going to be the biggest because it's the very first. So the majority of people who hear divine truth from the beginning are going to have this injury. I am God. I have the right. I know what is right. I know what is wrong. I have the right to determine what is right and wrong for myself. I have it's my law that matters, not yours. It's my way or the highway. It's like, is the idea. It's got to be about me. And all of these things encourage a lack of humility. So this whole concept that I can develop my own laws, I can be my own God, my own lawmaker, is fundamentally saying it's all about me. Right? Now that's not humility. Humility is recognizing, or part of humility is recognizing your position in regards to God. God is the creator. You are the creation. Right? Which is very, very different than thinking you are the lawmaker. Right? You're the creation. You're subservient to the law. Whether you like it or not, you are. And you will always be subservient to that law. Now, of course, the more you grow in love, the less subservient to the law you are, because the love in you governs how much harmony there is with every law. But the reality is you're still the child. You're still the creation. You're not the God who's the lawmaker. You are the child who is dependent upon the lawmaker in one way or the other. Right? So this fundamental belief, I am God, actually almost everybody on earth has. When we first meet them, almost everybody has it one way or the other. This is the most common belief on earth. I am God. Most of you are Buddhists, whether you think it or not. Even most Christians are actually Buddhists, you know, because they believe that they are God themselves. Shane?
Yeah, so my question is, I never grew up religious.
Yep.
But I had a feeling that God was there, or just like a higher power.
Yep.
So I never really had expectations on God. I just felt like God was just there, right? So, but then I'm like really self-reliant in my everyday life.
Yeah, God didn't matter to you.
Yeah.
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 That's because the average person goes, what does it matter what I believe in God? What matters is what I believe in myself.
Yeah.
Right? Which is really saying, I'm God, and I'm more important than the actual God, is really what we're saying. Still.
Yeah.
It's still that belief.
So how do I like undo that belief? Do I just like surrender to God, or what principles?
No, obviously you're going to have to work through, this is a fundamental belief that's going to have to be worked through. that God does matter, that it matters whether you actually believe in God or have a relationship with God. See, up until my coming in the first century, there was a lot of philosophy about God, about God's nature, God's character, and about what God is as well, besides what God does. There was a lot of philosophy, but none of it addressed the underlying issue as to whether they wanted a relationship with God, right? Where God and them were on agreement with every subject. So the general feeling that I've seen in humanity the whole time I've been alive is that there might be a God, there might not be a God. Who really cares? It's not practical consideration based upon day-to-day living. There are more important things to worry about. That's what the average person thinks. And that's how the average person acts, by the way, too, because that's definitely what they think, because it's how they act. But nothing could be more false, because if you have a relationship with God, happiness, is definitely going to happen for you. But if you have a relationship only with yourself, you are going to have to discover the laws by yourself that you're in disharmony with. And any law that you are already in disharmony with is going to be pain as a result of living in disharmony with that law. And you're going to have to go through an experimental process to work it out. Now, it occurred to me in the first century that the best experiment to begin first would have been whether God exists or not, and how important it is to have a good relationship with God or not. Because any other question is dependent upon that one question. Right? Any other question of what is true is dependent upon that one question. And wouldn't it be better for me to find out what is true from the person who knows what is true, rather than try to guess what is true through experiment? It would be far better. So until you start to contemplate within yourself the importance of having a relationship with God, can you see everything else you do is going to reflect the fact that you believe you're important, rather than God being the most important, right? And so this is where I see most people go. Most people are in that state where their day-to-day life, and many of you are in this state too, you don't realise it, but you're in this state where your day-to-day life reflects that you are God still, not that God is God, and that you are a child of God governed by law. And frequently, as a result of that, we disobey the law to our own detriment, but we think it's going to be to our betterment. But it's going to always be to our own detriment, because we're disobeying the law that God set up, and there's penalties for that. Yeah? So, to answer your question, the fundamental thing you're going to have to internally determine is how important do you think God is?
Thank you.
Yeah. And unless you determine that, you're not going to be able to determine much else. Okay? And what I feel in people on the whole, even most people who are listening to God's truth, divine truth on earth, they have not yet determined that answer to that question. How important God is to them personally. And a lot of people are drawn, as Max said earlier, a lot of people are drawn to divine truth, treating it like a personal self-improvement program. Right? That basically saying, I'm God, I want to be happy. How do I do that? It's not saying, I am going to deal with this fundamental question. If God exists, can I have a relationship with God, and how important is that relationship to me? Is it more important than anything else? More important than Mary? Because I know that without the relationship with God, our relationship can't continue to everlastingly grow. Without God. Because God is the infinite, I'm a finite being. Without God, I'm going to grow to a finite level, and that's it. And that means a finite relationship with a finite depth of feeling. But if I receive feelings from God and I can keep growing infinitely, now we have the potential of having an infinite relationship too, one that continues to grow forever. Like, to my mind, that's more attractive then having a relationship that stagnates because we can't grow anymore. Right? So, to my mind, the relationship with God is the most important thing we can have. But on earth, the average person thinks, no, my other relationships are more important. My relationship with my family is more important to me. My relationship with my friends, my relationship with my partner, my relationship with my children, my relationship with my dog and cat. We see that all the time. Like, there was this lady walking along with her dog in a pram. More than one. We go for a walk, like I said, around. There's this lady walking along with her dog in a pram, and all they can think about is nursing their dog. It's like they're thinking about nursing their dog more than they are about having a relationship with God. Right? So, if that's the way we're thinking, if that's the extent of our beliefs, can you see it's going to have a very large determining factor as to where I'm going to live my life and drive my life. And so for yourself, Chang, this is the reason why your life isn't driven towards God yet. You can feel with Kimberly, it is more driven, isn't it, towards God. Your partner, she's more driven towards God because fundamentally, emotionally, she's had more resolution inside of herself about whether that relationship is important to her or not. Make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. For yourself, you haven't resolved that yet. You think it's a good idea, and this is why you're happy to listen to divine truth, and it does benefit your life to some degree, because it also benefits Kimberly and yourself by listening to some truth, but not yet determining whether the relationship with God is the most important thing, is going to dictate the direction of your entire life until that changes. Yeah? Yeah.
Thank you.
Just next to you.
I guess my question with everything that's been brought up it's twofold. One was based on whether this is a true belief that I was given or somewhat of a false one masking over. Growing up in religion class, my family was open. But whenever they would mention the Son as being God, and I was growing up Catholic, it always didn't connect. And I always got pressured on it. It just never did. And I would try praying that way, it wouldn't connect. But my father would always say, you can always talk to God.
Yep.
And that kept me going through so much.
Yep.
So what was that? Instinctual knowing, or what would...
Well, most of the time when these things happen, you've got spirits who know the truth, who are trying to guide you. And there's almost with every person who's got any religious faith on earth, there are groups of spirits trying to lead them to more truth. Right? So because you've got a fundamental belief in God at some level, there is going to be spirits around you saying, let's try to help the person feel different things about whether this is true or not. So when you're presented the idea that the Son is a part of God, like the triune God, the average person when they're a child goes, that doesn't sound very logical to me. Right? The average child doesn't feel that's logical. Now, of course, they've got guides who are telling them that is just not logical. Right? And most children, when they're a child, will listen to those guides. So the child's going, yeah, that doesn't sound logical. I can't connect to that. Right? And so internally what's going on is I've yet to have a formulated belief of my own as a child. Because when I'm born with no beliefs, fundamentally, aside from those I've imbibed emotionally from my parents. Once I'm conceived, I have no beliefs. Then I've imbibed some during the gestation period, during pregnancy, emotions from my parents, but they've not come along with any logic or anything like that at this stage. And so by the time I'm born, now I'm starting to assimilate things, and by the time I start developing my brain, I'm now taught things that are also logical and emotional. And as a result, whoever is guiding me, my guide in the spirit world, and everyone has one, generally, when they're a child, that's the case, everyone has one. Not always when they're an adult, but as a child, everyone would have one. And any thought you have that is feels like, I can't get that. That doesn't make any sense to me. Those spirits will be going, yeah, you're dead right. That doesn't make any sense. Why are you trying to believe that for? Why are these people teaching you that? That's silly. Why have they got that idea for? And this will cause a disconnect emotionally from the false belief, which is great. It's exactly what you want when you're growing up. You want to not be able to imbibe the false beliefs if possible, right? But if I have specific issues emotionally with the whole concept of a father, right, then I will be a lot more attracted to the idea that the son is the one I connect to. Right? Now, if I have spirits around me who then say, yes, connect to the son, in fact, we'll give you feelings that you are connecting to the son, I'm going to then go, Jesus is everything. Jesus this, Jesus that, Jesus this, Jesus that, right? With everything in that place. So can you see, a lot depends upon my environment that I'm in as to what I'll eventually accept. Now, for you, you obviously had a guy during that phase saying the whole concept that Jesus is a part of God doesn't make any sense at all. It's illogical. And you never could accept the logic of that, which is fantastic. Right? But you have accepted that one. That fundamentally I'm my own lawmaker. I'm allowed to determine what is right and wrong. I'm allowed to say for myself. I'm allowed to not... I don't need to find out what God's truth is. I need to live my own truth, is the underlying feeling that I can feel in you, right? So even though you were prevented through the example I've given through the Spirit who was helping you to believe in the Trinity, there was a temptation through other things that happened in your life to believe this in the end. Make sense?
Yeah, and I can feel that would resonate, but I still had this pull towards a relationship with God.
Of course.
And I guess my second question is, like, my personality was extremely emotional when I was younger.
Yep, well, everybody's is.
Yeah, and I can remember when, this holds resonance, it's coming, that when my grandfather first passed, I was with him, and I didn't get a chance to let it out, and I went to the farm, and I just went it out, and my dad came out and said, get inside.
Yeah. Stop you from crying?
I was raging.
Yeah.
And I didn't have much of a close relationship with my grandmother on my father's side either, but my aunt and uncle were arguing in the kitchen.
So what's the question, though?
Sorry, yeah, that's the story. I'm just wondering, what is my personality then seeking God's love the whole time? I feel like in certain areas I was, and that I might have unknowingly got the love.
What you're interpreting as your personality is a spirit friend trying to help you and motivate you in that direction. And this is one of our false beliefs, actually, about ourselves frequently, is that I knew the truth when I was a child. You didn't. You were born blank of truth, and you had to learn it. Somebody was teaching you it. And part of the process is to come to terms with the fact that somebody was teaching you it. Does that make sense? Now, it was a well-motivated spirit who knew the truth, which is fantastic, and is still trying to encourage you with your relationship with God right to this day. Make sense? Well-motivated spirit friend helping you in that regard. But don't presume that as a child you knew the truth. You didn't know it, you were told it by, fortunately, somebody who knew what the truth was. And I've been encouraging you this entire time. Yeah?
Thank you.
Yeah. Now that's not the same yet as you accepting it. Does that make sense? Because there's still this feeling inside that is going to have to be addressed. Yeah. If we go back, no,
Yeah. Like him, I grew up Catholic.
Yep.
And on top of that, there was another tribal god that kind of lived on top of a mountain.
Yes, yes.
So
When you say a tribal God?
Tribal God, like the people who speak their language, they believe that they are God, or they are God for just that tribe.
Yeah.
So, and everybody is like bouncing off between the Christianity and the tribal one.
Yes.
And
this is very common worldwide, yeah?
Yeah. And also my parents are kind of violent, and I'm trying to find a soft God.
Yep.
So,
and the Christian God doesn't seem that soft.
No.
And the tribal God doesn't seem that soft either, right?
No, people had to sacrifice for that God. And a lot of brutality within the tribe.
Yeah.
And the Catholics also are also violent. So
yeah.
I'm trying to. I've had a hard time trying to find a God that I can connect with on a personal level.
Yeah. And let's first look at your history with God, because this is very important and part of beliefs matter, and that is what you were emotionally taught when you were a child will frequently cause you to believe one thing or the opposite thing. So an example of that is there are many people who are taught in the Christian God as a child, and they grow up to believe God is a punishing God who punishes the wicked, and any time that you break the law, you're wicked, so he's going to punish you. And so a very rigid, sort of unloving rule maker who is right down the line with you, right? Is the general concept. Now, there'll be one or the other things that will happen there. You will either agree with that, or you'll disagree with that. If you agree with it, you'll accept that that's what God is. If you disagree with it, you'll go searching for a kinder God. Or, in many cases, people who are brought up with that search for there being no God. They want there to be no God because they're only taught that God is like that and there's no other way God is, so they start believing that it's better to believe no God rather than that, which probably is true, isn't it?
Yeah, I probably did that. My 20s were traumatic, like trying to do whatever.
Yeah. So then the next step is to go, right, okay, I'm searching for a kind God. But now, can you see, there's also a predisposition in there, isn't there? That anything that says that God has laws, that God is down the line with laws, we're going to be tempted to not agree with. We're going to start to feel that maybe what God is he just lets us do anything we want and it's all good. So we'll start wanting to believe in a permissive God. Because we think permissive is kind. Right? So we end up with the concept of God that God is permissive, lets me do whatever I want to do. This is becoming more and more even Christian belief nowadays. You see a lot of Christians nowadays even going, God's very permissive and he lets us do anything sexually, emotionally, it doesn't matter what happens. As long as you believe in the blood of Jesus, you'll be saved anyway. And so it doesn't really matter how much mischief you get up to in your day-to-day life. And God's, kind in the sense that he just lets you live your life how you want to live it. That's not true either. There are laws that are involved in love. So we will either we can accept the whole idea that God is punishing, or we can accept the whole idea that God is permissive, or we can accept that God doesn't exist once we have that kind of history. And then on top of that, what you call your tribal God is actually just a spirit who governs your tribe in the spirit world, right? So on top of that now, we've got God, who is, we feel, growing up in Christian faith, rigid and controlling and unloving, punishing any wickedness. And then we've got our tribal God who is telling us, do this, do that, stay in the tribe, you must do this and do that. To stay in agreement with me, in other words, he's saying you must do this and that. And this is very common worldwide. The Hindu faith has this, the Buddhists have this, Christians even have this. They have a tribal, or you could say a family member in the spirit world who's saying, you've got to believe in this, you have to believe in this, you've got to believe in that, and if you don't believe in that, I'm going to punish you for not believing in that, You've got to have respect for me, respect for your elders, respect for the fact that I've come before you, respect for the fact that I brought you into the world, and all of these kind of things. And so there's a lot of imposition that comes with those kind of spirits upon people on earth, who then interpret that person to also be God, which is not, and that person isn't God. It's just a person in the spirit world from your history who's trying to dominate your life, trying to tell you what to do, right? Now, all of these things happen, and most people on earth have no idea how much it's actually dominating their life. Because the spirit who's in your head saying you should do this and you should do that and you should follow this cultural thing and you should follow this way of life and you should do this thing, and that spirit's got his own ideas about what is right and wrong that he's imposing upon you. And then you've got the imposition of the false beliefs about God that are also imposing upon you. So then what are you left to believe? It's pretty tricky, isn't it? It's pretty difficult. And unfortunately, unless you get rid of the reasons why, the emotional connection with the history of those beliefs inside of yourself, it's going to be very, very difficult to feel who God really is. So rather than search for a kind God, I would suggest search for God herself. So can you see when I say I'm searching for a kind God, I'm already predefining to myself what I believe God would be. Now, it is true that God is kind, but God's many other things other than kind. So God's also a lawmaker. God's also a creator. So God's creative. God's passionate. God's desirous. God loves. You know, these are all additional qualities, not just kind. Don't, like, if you just search for a kind God, you're not going to be looking at all the other things God needs to be as well. In order for God to exist, God would need to be these other things.
So what you're saying is I have to remove what I believe and start fresh.
Yes. It's the easiest thing to do. If you try to build on a belief you already have, you don't know whether that belief is false or true. It's better to sort of start afresh and go, okay, let me get into a state where God defines to me what God is.
Wow, how do I do that?
Well, if I've got a whole heap of ideas inside of myself of what God is, can you see I'm going to carry them around, aren't I?
Yes.
Yep.
And in a way, I'm defining God, aren't I?
So I'm now defining God.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying God's like this, God should be like that, God should be like this, God should be like that, to myself.
And then if I say I want to find a kind God, that's me also trying to define. So I don't want this definition that's already in me, I want a different one.
Yeah.
So I'm not a blank slate at any point here.
No. To be a blank slate, I've got to let go of all of my old beliefs about God. They're all emotional. There's all reasons why I believe them. So I've got to let go of the Christian view of God. I've got to let go of this idea that I am God. I've got to let go of the fact that there's many gods. I've got to let go of all of these, what I believe might be facts, but they're not. I've got to let all of them go. So now, and I've got to let them go emotionally. I've got to go through some emotions to let them go. And that's a lot about, grieving, fundamentally, what you've been taught about God. That makes sense? You've been taught a lot of bad things about God. Yeah? If you can grieve what you're taught about God and just have a good cries about what you're taught, now you become open to God sharing with you through the conscience what God is. So God wants to talk to you. You're his child. He wants to talk to you. He wants to share with you what he is. He wants to tell you, this is what I'm like. Right? He wants to do that for all of his children. But before we can listen, we're going to have to get rid of all the things we already believe about God. Makes sense, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and the more harsh our childhood has been, generally the more harsh our beliefs are. Right? And this is part of our problem, is that some of us have had very hard childhoods and therefore have very harsh beliefs about what God is.
So, I'm a recovering Catholic,
Yep.
and I, for a long time, Enrique would be like, what do you believe? God is nature, God is the ocean, God is the wind, God is, so now I'm thinking, am I God? Is that what I'm thinking? Because I have obviously father injuries, and so is it because I don't want to believe in the whole father thing? I'm blocking it, and I'm saying God is the ocean, God are the birds, God is nature.
God is nature. Yeah, very common belief, isn't it? Yeah, on earth. And certainly is another belief that causes people to not see that God has a personality. See, by saying God is nature, or another common one is God is energy. Right? What we're basically saying is that God isn't a person who has things. We're saying He is those things. Right? Which is very, very different actually when you think about it. Because if God is nature, then how do you have a relationship with God? You have a relationship with nature, is what you think. Right? But nature isn't a person. Nature is a combination of all sorts of things going on, isn't it? Trees, plants, animals, birds, sea creatures, everything. And the fundamental belief here would be that if I have a closer bond with those things, then I have a closer bond with God. Right? Interestingly, though, that historically, the people who believed that knew there was a God behind nature.
There's something behind there. I know there is. There's something.
That's right.
But I don't want to feel it. I don't want to.
Correct. And then the question becomes, well, why don't you want to?
Because I hate my father, because he hated me, he abandoned me, da-da-da.
Well, that's one reason, but another reason is this reason.
Yeah, I am God. I feel like when you said that, I was like, yeah.
I want to determine for myself my own life. Thank you very much. I don't want to have some daddy person telling me what to do.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
I don't want no mom, no dad, no husband, no children,
That's right.
Nobody.
Yeah.
It's me.
It's just me. I'm going to be self-determining. Yeah. So it's a mixture, isn't it, of that belief and dislike of your own father that would cause such beliefs. Make sense?
So much.
Yeah.
Like all this, I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you think about it, it is going to determine this whole concept of the mixture between that, and the hatred of that, you could say, almost. So you've got that, and the hatred of that mixed together in your concept of God. Can you see? A lot of people with those concepts, and many people on earth have this mixture, it's going to determine a large degree of what you choose to do with your life. A large degree. So instead of developing a relationship with the personality God, you're going to start developing firstly a relationship with self. So you're going to say, it's really important I love myself the most, that I care for myself the most, that I look after myself the most, to the detriment of others, to a large degree. I then start saying, when I'm with nature, I'm with God, right? But most of us on earth are very disconnected from nature in lots of ways, aren't we? We are. We see here in every country we've been to a huge disconnect between just living even in a natural way. Like most people live in cities or towns. Most people are very disconnected from the environment, what they're doing to it. And so you can say our relationship with nature is fractured. So we're actually destroying nature even though we're saying God is nature. So that's fundamentally flawed. Like if God was nature, wouldn't we honour it? Wouldn't we respect it? Wouldn't we do more for it? Right? Many of us say God is nature, but then if you look at our day-to-day activity, we're destroying nature. So in other words, we still disrespect God if that's what we believe God is. Right? And then thirdly, we have injuries associated with concepts like father, mother. Injuries associated with concepts about God. So when I say God is my father, why would I want a father for? Like, because the underlying feeling is, my father was terrible, I don't want another father. That means I've got two fathers to please, and two fathers to disappoint, and two fathers to be angry with, and two fathers to, have arguments with, and so forth. So we don't want God to do that. And so our concept of God to a large degree here is going to determine whether, firstly, we have an ability to have a relationship with God, but it's also going to determine what I think is important. Because while I'm that angry with the concept of Father, and while I'm believing that I am important, and while I believe nature is sort of important, but I don't treat it like that, and my life is to a large degree going to become self-absorbed, that everything I choose to do will be about me, or what's right for me, or what's right for my family and my life and my welfare, and I'll be looking at everything from the perspective of me, right? And in the process of doing that, I become more and more and more self-absorbed and selfish, right? And in doing that, we're not realising all of the sin we're creating when we're so self-absorbed and selfish. All of the harm we're creating to others, our family, our partner, our environment, all the harm we're creating. So that's all driven by these underlying beliefs. See, even if I honoured that God was nature, even if I did believe that, and I truly believe that, could you see, I would be very concerned about everything I did to the environment, wouldn't I? But the average person who says God is nature isn't very concerned about the environment, actually, right? And so when people say God is energy, it's the same sort of thing. Let's turn God into something that's not a person, something that I don't have to relate to as a being, something that sort of means that I can just go, it's just God's this flowing energy, this life force that goes through the universe. Isn't it so wonderful? I'm fundamentally an atheist, really, in a lot of ways, in that state, really. And in doing that, what I'm doing is I'm disconnecting from the possibility of having a proper relationship with a loving being, God. Right? And so these beliefs will taint, to a large degree, your future. They would taint your future decisions and choices. And they'll taint it in so many ways that you can hardly even understand because of the fundamental beliefs we have. And this is why we want to talk to some spirits with some of these beliefs, because, and this is why we wanted to talk with you, because many of you don't understand how these beliefs are currently tainting your current choices, and particularly your choices to meet your own addictions, which are your own sins. Right? These kind of beliefs almost cause you to say, I'm the most important person to consider, right? Rather than that there is a lawmaker and laws to consider. Right? So, yes, what you've raised are very important things, yep, in terms of beliefs about God. Now, while those beliefs about God, what God is, exist within me, then I'm probably not going to ever sincerely attempt to have a relationship with God. Because I want God to be something other than that. So I don't want God to be a father. I want to be God, and I would like God to be nature, but only if nature supports me. If nature doesn't support me anymore, then I'm against it. That kind of idea. And these will largely determine the choices you make in terms of the decisions you make, and the way you use your will, your free will be largely dictated by these fundamental beliefs. Well, it's nearly 1 o'clock, isn't it? It is 1 o'clock. I said I'd finish at 12:30, but so it's 1:05. Should we come back at 1:35? We have lunch now, I think, and then what we want to do, Mary and I, is we want to firstly channel some spirits who have some of these beliefs,